it's very clear that Vladimir Putin has decided that he will eliminate his opponents and anyone who stands up for democracy and freedom, and he does so with relative impunity. So despite the attempts on Vladimir's life, the revolutionary spirit of this brave Russian patriot is unbroken. And I would just like to summarize, Mr. Chairman, by saying this same spirit is true of Vladimir's countrymen who joined protests this past weekend in nearly 100 Russian cities against the tyranny and corruption of the Putin regime.
This past Sunday, March 26, marked 17 years since Vladimir Putin was elected president of Russia. It was not by any means a flawless election. There were credible reports of ballot stuffing and serious doubts as to whether Mr. Putin had obtained the 50% necessary for victory in the first round. But it was nevertheless the last thing we had that was at least close to a democratic vote. Not a single election held in Russia since then has been assessed by OSCE monitors as free and fair.
IRI has seen firsthand the destructive influence of this campaign to weaken democratic institutions.
Last Sunday, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, tens of thousands of people went out to the streets across Russia, 82 cities and towns across 9 time zones from Vladivostok to Kaliningrad. And I may add that the vast majority of those protesters were young people, people in their 20s and early 30s and their teens, many college students, many high school kids. More than 1,500 people were arrested this past weekend. And there are now indications that the authorities may be preparing criminal charges against some of the participants. But there are, of course, worse fates than imprisonment. In the last several years, investigative journalists, opposition figures, human rights activists, anti-corruption campaigners, and whistleblowers have met untimely deaths.
I've always argued to my colleagues that one of the ways we have to understand Vladimir Putin's actions in the world is his domestic policies.
Twice in the past 2 years, in May of 2015 and just last month, both times in Moscow, I experienced a sudden onset of symptoms consistent with poisoning that led to a multiple organ failure and left me in a coma and on life support. Doctors estimated the chance to survive at about 5%. And both times, the reason for this poisoning was named as undefined toxin. So I'm very fortunate and certainly very grateful to be sitting here today. But these crackdowns and these repressions are only one side of the story. Because even in this atmosphere, and in spite of it, there are people and organizations in Russia that continue to work to promote and defend human rights, the rule of law, and political freedoms.